All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving headfirst into the world of meth withdrawal. And trust me, it's a lot more complicated than just waiting for the crash to pass.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's a wild ride, and you're right. There's a whole lot more to it than most people even realize.
So let's get right to it. When someone's coming off meth, that initial crash is, well, it's kind of legendary, but what's actually happening in the body during those first few days?
Okay, so picture this. Methamphetamine. It floods your brain with dopamine, right? It's like slamming the gas pedal on those feel-good chemicals, sending your system into total overdrive. But then when you just stop using, your brain can't just ease off the gas. It slams on the brakes, and that sudden shift, it throws everything completely out of whack.
So it's not even just that you're low on dopamine, it's that your whole system is reeling from that sudden stop.
Exactly. And that's where all those intense, almost immediate withdrawal symptoms come in. You mentioned the crash, and yeah, it's a pretty fitting name. We're talking serious fatigue, like your body's running on fumes, your brain gets foggy, it's hard to think straight. And then you've got the potential for some really, really unsettling psychological stuff.
And this is where it gets really intense, right? The research you shared talked about hallucinations, paranoia, things that honestly sound like they're straight out of a movie.
It can feel that surreal? Absolutely. You see, meth, it doesn't just mess with your dopamine, it disrupts other neurotransmitters too, like serotonin and norepinephrine. And those imbalances can really throw your senses for a loop, which leads to those vivid and often really disturbing hallucinations. And because meth also messes with the parts of your brain that deal with fear and anxiety, paranoia is a pretty common side effect too.
Man, it sounds incredibly intense, both physically and mentally. And from what I gathered, it's not just a one-two punch of symptoms. There's a whole timeline to this withdrawal, with different phases bringing different challenges to the table.
Yet that initial crash, that's just the beginning. And unfortunately for a lot of people, things actually get tougher before they start to get better.
Wait, so it gets even worse after that initial crash?
Yeah, you're entering what we call the acute withdrawal phase. It usually kicks in around the end of that first week, and it can last for several weeks. This is where the cravings really dig their heels in. Remember, your brain is in a depleted state. It's desperate to get that surge of dopamine it's gotten used to.
So it's like a double whammy of intense physical and psychological withdrawal, all hitting at the same time.
And the thing is, the psychological part is often overlooked. We tend to focus on the physical dependency, but the emotional and mental toll during this phase, it's huge. We see that crushing fatigue turn into insomnia, anxiety morphing into full-blown panic attacks, and a really heartbreaking one that doesn't get talked about enough is severe depression.
That's not something you hear about a lot, but it makes sense when you think about the brain's chemistry being so out of balance.
Right. Your brain is basically in survival mode, just trying to find some kind of equilibrium again, and that can often manifest as these extreme lows.
Okay, so we've got this roller coaster of symptoms, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? The research mentions something called a subacute phase of withdrawal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where things start to level out, but it's important to be clear about what that actually means. We're talking week 2 or 3 onwards, and it's not like you just wake up feeling like your old self. It's more that the really intense, raw edge of that initial withdrawal, it starts to fade a little. Think of it like if that acute phase is like being stuck right in the middle of a hurricane, the subacute phase is like when the storm finally moves on.
Okay. Yeah.
There's still debris everywhere. The whole landscape is different, and there's a ton of rebuilding to do, but the immediate danger, that's gone.
Okay. That's a really vivid image. So physically, someone in this phase, they might still be dealing with being tired or their sleep's messed up, but it's not as bad as it was those first couple weeks.
Exactly. The body's kind of starting to find its feet again. But here's the thing, and this is where the research really hammered home how complicated meth withdrawal is. The mind, the emotions, that stuff can stick around long after the really intense physical stuff fades.
So even if you're sleeping okay and you're getting your energy back, you're still fighting those intense cravings and that mental back and forth.
Absolutely, and that's why this phase, this subacute phase, it's so important when we talk about recovery. Because it's not just about getting through that initial crash, it's about navigating this long, winding road ahead.
And that road is full of potential problems, right? The research mentioned relapse as a major concern during this time.
Yeah, it's a constant battle. Think about it. You've got someone who's been using meth to cope, to feel good, to escape, and now they're facing all those underlying issues without their crutch. Plus, on top of that, you've got the brain's reward system basically screaming for dopamine.
So you're actually more vulnerable than ever to falling back into old habits.
Unfortunately, yeah. And that's why understanding all the little details of this subacute phase is so important, right? Because if we don't figure out the underlying reasons someone turned to meth, if we don't give them healthier ways to cope, that risk of relapse, it's still incredibly high, even months later.
Which brings us to the whole recovery process, right? Detox is a big first step, obviously, but it sounds like it's really just the tip of the iceberg.
100%. Detox, it gets the drug out of your system, but it doesn't magically erase the addiction. That's where therapy, support groups, and a whole lot of hard work come in.
Let's dig into that a bit. We talked about how meth basically rewires the brain. So how do you even begin to undo that, to kind of retrain those neural pathways?
That's where stuff like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for short, that's shown a lot of promise.
Hmm.
And the research you shared had some fascinating stuff about techniques they use in CBT. One that really stuck with me was something called cognitive restructuring. Basically, it's about recognizing and then challenging those automatic negative thoughts that often lead to addictive behaviors.
So it's like hitting the pause button on thoughts like, I need meth to feel okay, and swapping them out with more helpful ones.
That's the idea. It's about rewiring those ingrained thought patterns, those habits of thought, and replacing them with something healthier. Like, instead of, I can't handle this without meth, a therapist might help someone reframe that thought as, this craving is intense, but it'll pass, and I've got tools to manage it.
So it's almost like learning a new language, swapping out the language of addiction for the language of recovery.
I love that. And that's exactly why therapy can be so powerful. It gives you a safe space to not only learn those new ways of thinking and acting, but also to really dig into the root causes of the addiction.
Which could be all sorts of things, right? Past trauma, underlying mental health issues.
Exactly. And this is where we have to remember that addiction is rarely about the drug itself. It's a symptom of something deeper. So a good therapist will help someone unpack all that, addressing things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, all those things that might have fueled the addiction in the first place.
So it sounds like a really holistic approach, treating the whole person, not just zeroing in on the addiction.
Absolutely. And that often means connecting people with support groups, too. These groups offer that crucial sense of community, of shared experience, and that can make a world of difference in recovery.
Yeah, the research talked about that power in knowing you're not alone in this fight.
It's huge. Imagine going through this incredibly tough process, feeling completely isolated. Support groups, they're a lifeline. It's a place where people get what you're going through, they offer encouragement, and they share coping strategies.
And I bet that peer support is especially valuable when it comes to dealing with those common misconceptions and fears about meth withdrawal, right?
Yeah, it's like having this whole team of people who get it. They've been there, and they're ready to offer advice and support based on what they've actually lived through.
That's got to be so empowering for someone in those early days of recovery. Like, hey, if they can get through this, maybe I can too.
Exactly. And that brings up another interesting thing from the research, this idea that recovery, it isn't just about cutting meth out of your life. It's about rediscovering joy and fulfillment in healthier ways.
Okay, say more about that. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, remember how we talked about meth hijacking the brain's reward system? Yeah, over time, it basically rewires your brain to only seek pleasure through the drug. Recovery is about rewiring those pathways, teaching your brain to find satisfaction in things that are actually good for you.
So things that might have brought joy before, hobbies, relationships, achieving something you're proud of, those things might feel dull or meaningless after using meth for a long time.
It's definitely a common experience, unfortunately. But the good news is that those pathways can be reactivated. It takes time and it takes effort. But as someone gets further into recovery, they often find that those simple things they used to enjoy, a pretty sunset, laughing with friends, that sense of accomplishment from just getting through the day, they start to mean something again.
It's like you're taking back those parts of yourself that the addiction was hiding.
Exactly. And that's why the research really highlighted the importance of not just focusing on what you're giving up, but what you're gaining in recovery.
So it's not just about toughing it out and staying sober. It's about rebuilding a life that feels good and fulfilling on its own without needing the drug.
That's it. It's about taking your life back, rebuilding those connections, and rediscovering who you really are underneath it all.
Man, this has been an eye-opening deep dive. We've really covered it all when it comes to meth withdrawal, the really rough initial symptoms, the long road of recovery, everything. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Some food for thought as they keep learning about this topic.
When we talk about addiction, it's easy to get stuck on the negative, the damage it can do. But if there's one thing I want your listeners to take away from this, it's this. Recovery is possible. Not only that, but it's a journey of incredible strength, resilience, and real transformation.
So well said. It's about taking back your story and rewriting it with hope, with possibility.
Exactly. It's a testament to just how powerful the human spirit is, that we can heal and overcome even the toughest stuff life throws at us.
And on that powerful note, we'll leave you with this. You are not alone. If you or someone you know is struggling with meth addiction, reach out, get help. There are resources out there, people who care, and a brighter future waiting on the other side of recovery.